No, that's the one I said after. Oh, yeah, I didn't know that. You just put it at me. That's what I was gonna ask. Does that identify the scale? So where's the scale? Is it a picture? That's it.
Well, I'll double check, but if these are the notes that you got, this does look like yours because it's like national market yeah, and I rarely go into details and find the whole semester kind of the mode. But let me double check. Yeah, you're good, Lane.
But you don't have to specify what you need.
All right, good morning, everyone. Let's get started. I see we're shying Preston and Coulson.
Oh, Preston got a shot yesterday.
Yeah, in fact, I think I got an email from Preston. I did not get an email from Coulson or Daniel. but they
Colson
might-
got shot yesterday?
He could have. I don't know. Let's see what a snap maps is.
Well, while you're doing that, let's take out the homework that you have for today if you haven't already. There are several pages in the workbook that I have asked you to complete. And really, when you go back to, I think when you go back to it, I never did even look at page 271, section.
That's okay.
Okay.
We can go that way.
But I mean, so really for today, I can collect anything from page 271 to 276. But I'd rather not collect all those pages because that's a lot of reading.
Yeah.
And I do want to get to start looking at my instrumentation projects a little bit this weekend. I think as long as I collect maybe a couple pages, like a front and a back or something like that, that should be sufficient. So think about what you might want me to collect. I think I'm open to pretty much anything. And then let me ask first of all if there are any questions. Yeah.
Can you show a hexagonal scale for on that?
A hexatonic scale starting on F? Yes. Okay, so last class we learned that a hexatonic scale is a 6-note scale. It's like the whole tone scale, but it's not quite exactly the same. The hexatonic scale, the scale degrees are separated by half steps and minor thirds. Half steps and minor thirds. So, excuse me, if we start on F, and we should start with the half step for the hexatonic scale, then the next note I have is an F sharp. Then I go a minor third above there, and I get an A. Then I go a half step above there, and you can spell it as A sharp or B flat, it doesn't matter. Because remember, these are synthetic scales, and enharmonics are allowed. Then a minor third above B flat is a D flat. Then if I'm calculating right, I need a half step, so then I use D natural. And then a minor third above that is going to get me back to the starting pitch. So that's an octave duplication of the first. But these should be my 6 different notes. F, F sharp, A, B flat, and G flat. The B flat and the D flat?
Yeah, try to show A sharp.
Okay. A sharp and C sharp.
Yeah.
So A sharp would work also, and C sharp. And then you wouldn't need the accidental underneath the natural if you did it that way. Yeah, so half step, half step and then minor third, alternating for hexatonic scale.
Can we do number 2 on page 279?
Number 2 on page 273, yes. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take a pitch inventory here. And I see that the final for number 2, I would say, is G. Okay, so I'm going to start my pitch inventory by scale notes that I get on G. Oh, let's see here. Do I have an A? Yes, I do. Do I have some sort of B? Yes, I do. What kind of B is it? B flat due to the key signature? Looks like I've got a C and a D. I see an E. Yep, there's an F as well. I think that's going to be it. Okay. So how many different pitches are in this scale? 4, 5, 6, 7. That means it's got to be either a major scale, a minor scale, or a mode. Does it look like a major or a minor scale that we know of, that we're used to? Not exactly, no. But it looks really close to a G minor scale, doesn't it? A G natural minor scale? Because G natural minor would have two flats, B flat and E flat. But it's not exactly that way. So it's a natural minor scale with one adjustment. That is, the sixth scale degree has been raised a half step. That should lead you to conclude that it's what mode? Yeah, that's right. So there's ways to solve these problems. Let me go to her first and then I'll come back to you. Uh-huh. Is that what you're going to ask? Oh, you're going to ask number 1. Okay. Maybe I'm not going to be collecting page 273.
Can we at least go over it then?
Can I what?
Can we at least go over number 1?
Oh, yeah.
If you're not going to collect.
But that doesn't really say because she's from our school.
I don't know.
Okay. Number 3, though, on page 273, I'm looking at the last notes, and thankfully they're all C's. So I'm going to start my scale with that. Taking a pitch inventory, what kind of D's do I have here? Okay, D flat, I would agree. I see two kinds of E's. I see both E flat and E natural. I see an F sharp. Let's see. Just plain G, right? Okay. And then in the last measure in the right hand, I see an A and a B flat. And you don't really have to include the repeated pitches. All right, how many different pitches did I find here? 8. That should be enough to tell you that it's a what type of scale? Octatonic, that's right. Can you verify it by saying, look, it's half step, full step, half step, full step. Half step is the alternating half steps and whole steps. That's what an octatonic scale is. With 8 different pitches. These are pretty, these aren't really too bad. But I mean, until you get a little bit of experience figuring this out, I'm going to go next to number 1. Numero uno. Okay, the final that I get here is, oh, I'm in a funky clef, careful. What is the last note? G. G. What up, G? Never gets old enough. I'm sure it does. Okay, so G, look at this clef. Looks like I have a regular A and B. C sharp. You see that in the second measure? I see a D sharp in the first measure. A D flat in the what? Okay, D flat, thank you, but we'll just put that right here because it's enharmonic. Okay, so count either one, but I mean, all right, any different notes here? I think I see D, D, D. I see an F. Is that in the third measure?
There's also E flat.
Oh, okay, E flat, that would be enharmonic with this one. But I mean, is there, do you see the F? That would be a different pitch.
Yeah.
Okay. And is that all the different pitches? How many different notes do I have to count enharmonic? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's either a hexatonic or a whole tone. What are the distances between all the pitches? Yeah, it's a whole tone scale, right? G to A is a whole step, A to B is a whole step, etc., all the way. See, this is, I we derive some kind of fun from
It's a little bit wordy.
it. It does make sense, yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, we got a lot of scales to choose from, but when you investigate, you can come up with a very educated answer. Yeah, so we don't necessarily, I don't want you to think that, oh yeah, look at these melodies, we have to guess what scale is going to be this, basis of these melodies. No, you don't have to guess. You can actually, you can know. You can know. All right. Would it be okay then for me to maybe collect page 271 and 272?
Can we do 75 and 76?
Yes.
Okay, how about this? How about just 272 only?
Okay.
That's
I can live with it.
I don't,
I can live with
Can
it.
we ask one question on this?
Let's see. I think you already did, right? The hexatonic scale?
Can we ask one on the other part of it then? Can we do like one from the bottom section?
Okay, all right, I got time. Let's just do one more question because then it's about 15 minutes into class. So, is it going to be you or is it going to be Amy?
Yes. I already asked questions. It's second out. Yeah.
Section F with the whole tone starting on which pitch?
C sharp.
Okay, yes. do that.
Just don't overthink the bottom.
Remember, on the bottom, you didn't need to do the Lydian mixolydian one. You can cross that.
Ah, I did that one.
No, you
How did
did.
you do it?
I didn't teach that one.
I just took like both things from it.
Oh, and combined it?
Yeah.
Is that close to where you're supposed to be?
It is, yeah.
Oh.
I mean, if you read in your textbook, you can find out how to spell.
Ah,
Oh.
I don't think it's like that.
Okay, a whole tone scale on C sharp. 6 notes, different notes, all a whole step apart. Enharmonic spellings are valid. They're okay. Okay, so a whole step above C sharp is D sharp. A whole step above D sharp is E sharp, but can we spell it a little simpler? Yeah, let's do it as F. A whole step above F is G. A whole step above G is A. And a whole step above A is B. And that should leave us with a whole step, one more whole step will get us back to the starting point. So yeah, there's a whole tone scale on C sharp.
Can you do that in a way if you did an E sharp
Yeah.
instead of the FN?
Yeah, so you did E sharp here. Did you do D here or did you do F double sharp?
F double sharp,
Okay, that's fine. Then did you do G double sharp?
please.
And then did you do A double sharp?
Yes.
But then you still got to end with C sharp.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. That would be fine.
Okay.
That would be fine.
So just 272?
This is just like an overall question.
Okay.
So how come like with these scales, like you don't have to follow the rule that every note like has a name, like you don't really have.
Yeah, you mean every pitch letter name has to be represented?
Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of these scales don't have enough pitches to do that even. For instance, you have to have at least 7 notes in your scale to have all the pitch letter names represented. You have 8. But this scale only has 6, so you can't have all of them represented. The hexatonic scale only has 6 pitches. Pentatonic scales only have 5 pitches. The octatonic, it's not up there. The octatonic scale, you'll have pretty much, I think, every pitch letter name represented, but you'll even have one duplicate. Well, you won't have a duplicate, you'll have like 2 of the same pitch letter name, just maybe a half step apart. Because there's 8 pitches in that scale. So like in an octatonic scale, you can have an E flat and an E natural. You can have 2 types of the same pitch letter name, just slightly different pitch. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so can you make sure your name is on page 272, and I will collect that one and look at that one over the weekend. Good, excellent. So it's readable, huh?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. No, I have a question on the rest, but it's still there. It's not too bad.
Yeah.
We're still there.
Good, yeah, I think I can read that.
I think it's one of my best.
Oh,
Oh, wait, no, there's only two. Oh, no, is it? Yeah, oh, no, we're.
yeah, we don't have to do the bottom.
Oh, yeah, I was up this one, we saw that, and that escaped.
I know, oh my gosh, there was 2 that we actually saw, and there was something else.
Yes.
Yeah, if you never, ever in doubt, just look at the assignment sheet.
Well, okay, I think it said delete appropriate notes, so you can delete a note, so, like cross out the A sharp and or the last one, B flat, and you block out the A sharp. There we go. I think you got that.
Can we just quickly verbally go over the answers then to page 274 through 276? Since I didn't collect those pages. We did all, I think we did all the scales on 273, right? Yeah. Well, let's talk about that one. The only one you have to do on 274 is number 4. And really, when I take a pitch inventory there, and I tried to let you all know at the end of last class, if you only get 5 notes or something, that's all you need. You don't need to try to insert or apply or infer any other pitches that might be missing. And so the final for number 4 is an E flat. That's the last pitch. And then the only other notes that I find are G flat, A flat, B flat, and D flat. And that's it. So I have in my notes, from in prior years, students, they like to fill in an F. They think, oh, there's some kind of F missing, and oh, there's a C missing, and I gotta have all the pitch letter names. No, not for these skills. So it's a 5, there are only 5 different notes. That means it's a pentatonic scale. And I think I would just accept pentatonic as the answer. But could anyone tell me which of the two? Is it the minor or is it the major? It's the minor pentatonic, that's right. Because this is scale degrees 1, 3, 4, 5, and 7 of E flat natural minor. And that's what a minor pentatonic scale is. Okay. Page 275, the first scale for number 1 was Dorian. The next one down below is whole tone. And the one on page 276, I have mixolydian.
I'm sorry, I thought we had a scale for the more points.
Well, there are only 3 scales, so if you miss one, boom, you're down to 67%.
Can we do the whole tone one on 75 really quick?
275, yeah. Yeah, when you look, you see that in the first measure of the bass clef, do you see the first pitches there? It looks like from the key signature D flat, E flat. But do you see how the D and the E on beat 1 are natural already? So those are the types of D and E you got to start with. So instead of D flat, I started with, by the way, D is, because I told you the arrow points to the final of the note, or whatever scale. Okay, so D and E, then there's F sharp, then there's A flat, and B flat, and C, and then there's G again. So 6 pitches. 6 different pitches. Means it has to be hexatonic or whole tone. All these scale degrees are a whole step apart, or at least enharmonically a whole step apart, right? F sharp to A flat, you can think of as F sharp to G sharp. That's a whole step. So the answer is going to be whole tone scale for this one. And that's all about it.
Where was the C at? I never found a C. Oh, never mind, I found it.
Yeah, but
Sorry. I didn't see it. I didn't see it. I thought I scanned like every line, and I'm like, oh, there's no C.
well, if the composer of this piece was heightened, then I'd understand why you couldn't see the C, because it's heightened.
Oh,
All right, can we move on now to some 20th century chords? Yeah, some of these are going to be really whack.
Yeah, that is pretty good.
Yesterday in 7 through 12, Mr. Barr is doing this thing, she's like, what picture is these? And I had no idea what talking about. She was so much. I was just been going, like, about us for an hour, and I don't know, but like, what do you do? And he literally could do it without pictures. He's like, oh, here's shooting.
For those of you that like structure and order in your life, we're in the middle of chapter 26 in your book, just so you know. And it starts on page 475. There's a little reading called Chord Structures. It's talking about 20th century chord structures. And I'm going to try to summarize and distill a lot of the information in the following pages from page 475 on. And I'll see how far I can get by the end of class today. Composers in the 20th century, they did continue to use traditional tertian harmonies. What is tertian? Yeah, chords that are built out of stacked verbs. So 20th century composers did still use triads and seventh chords and things like that. Well, they especially used ninth chords we read about, right? And 11th chords and 13th. Those are tertian chords as well, because just stack verbs on top of verbs to get those really tall, large chord structures, okay? But other chord structures were becoming increasingly common in the 20th century. And one rather unique harmony of the 20th century is known as a polychord. Not to be confused with Polycarp. And I'm trying to think who he was. Was he a philosopher? I don't remember. Maybe he was an old ancient religious, I don't remember, but I'm just trying to think of. Anyways, let me not get so sidetracked. The term is a polychord. One word. And the prefix PLY refers to many, or more than one. That's what poly means. By the way, have you ever decided, like if you have a girl, in the future you ever decided to name her Polly? That's a name, right? Although it's usually spelled with two L's. I prefer Penelope. Okay, polychord. What is a polychord? It consists of two or more different chords sounding simultaneously. And the key word here is different.
So like playing like a major and a minor triad?
Yes, that would be an example. We'll get to one specific like that. So a polychord consists of two or more different chords sounded simultaneously. And with a polychord, the different harmonies should be clearly perceivable as discrete or distinct chords. If you've got a mass of notes and you can't really separate the mass of notes into two separate, clearly distinct chords, you're probably not looking at a polychord. If I can display some examples on the screen for you. I've got to turn the TVs on since I didn't do that. I should assign a student here to be responsible for TV duty. Half the time these things, if I don't use them for like more than 10 minutes, they go off on me. Page 477 has a few examples. Example 2615. I crossed out letter A because I think that's a very poor example. It's a very weak example, and I don't think we need to worry about that. But take a look, for example, at measure B. Measure B. Each chord of a polychord, remember it's got to have two or more, each chord of a polychord is called a chordal unit. So they're comprised of chordal units. So if you look at measure B up on the screen there,
you see how there is a D minor triad in the left hand, the bass clef. And the treble clef, we have an E flat major triad. And mostly because of the spacing, the fact that all the notes of the D minor triad are close to each other down here, and then all the notes of the E flat major triad are close to each other up here, we can see those two chords as distinct or separate chords. One is clearly a D minor triad, one is clearly an E flat major triad. But they're sounding simultaneously. So when you play that all together, you get what's called a polychord. And you can see that term up there. When you actually have exactly two different chords sounding simultaneously, you have what's called a bichord. B-I-E-2. And the analysis symbol for a polychord is to use the pop symbol for each of the chords with a horizontal line dividing them. You see that above measure B? To analyze that polychord with an E flat major triad on top and a D minor triad on bottom, we write the pop symbol for E flat major and the pops over the pop symbol for D minor. And that's how I would analyze that. No Roman numerals necessary, because we're not even in a key really. It's not going to function well in a key or anything like that. So we're using pop symbols, not Roman numerals.
So do the chords like ever overlap? Would you ever like a D major and like an A major on top? Or would it never like have?
Yeah, you could do that as long as I think they were spaced or separated far enough apart that you could clearly perceive two separate chords. I think that would be fine, yeah. You see in measure C, the E flat major triad is even further away from the D minor triad. That makes it even clearer to distinguish between the two separate or different chords of the polychord.
So if one of the chords was like in like first inversion, would that change anything?
You know, I don't think it would change anything. I mean, if you were, like for instance, if the D minor triad on the bottom was in first inversion, you could get pretty technical and do, that slash notation that shows this is the bass note. I guess technically you could do that, but I don't think we have any. I'm trying to think if we even have any examples like that. And if we do, I'm not going to be that picky. I think just put the pop symbol for the chord over the other chord. So. And I'm going to play this in a second. You're going to like that. Yeah, we talked about, really it's the spacing makes the two chords of a polychord the clearest. The spacing. The wider the space between the two chords, the clearer the chordal units are. Okay, so let me take my book. So I can get it correct on count. All right, so this is measure B. Take a load of this sound. And this is measure C. That's maybe not as strident, not as harsh because there's more space, but you clearly have D minor and E flat major. Okay. So that's a polychord, an example of that. Now, if you look at the last measure on the screen there, a polychord that consists of a major and a minor triad built on the same root. It has a special name. You see how measure D on the right there is a D major triad sounding along with a D minor triad? Can you imagine, first of all, what that sounds like? Well, a polychord that has, let me say this again, a major and a minor triad built on the same root has a specific name, and that polychord is called a split third chord. So yes, the sonority in measure D is a polychord, but specifically it is a split third chord because it's a major and a minor triad built on the same root. And they're sounding at the same time.
I just play these sometimes in my office, you know, in order to. There's some split third chord. Minor versus major. Now, the further we get into this 20th century, we're going to get some really weird constructions, chords and scales and rhythms and things. And some of you might be like, because when I play a split third chord, it kind of sounds like a cat is walking across my piano. But I need to tell you this. There are tons and tons of musicians in this country that live, eat, and breathe 20th century music. It's their bread and butter. They just love it. They swear by it, they die by it. I mean, you can't, don't argue with them about it because, I don't know, and maybe it's not your taste, maybe it's not my taste, but there are people that, well, I guess because they understand it, they know what goes into it. They know that composers are experimenting, they're trying different sounds because they don't want the same thing as tonality had for the last 250 years. And so because of that, they understand that and I guess they relish it, they like it. So, just because I might say, this doesn't sound that great, or you might say, cringe, doesn't necessarily, I guess trying to get you to be open-minded here, because I know I met a lot of graduate students in my graduate career, and they're just all 20th century music, that's what they do.
I feel like from like a listening perspective, like the emotions elicited from that kind of stuff, like the emotions are much more complicated.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what
Maybe, yeah. Maybe they're just processing emotions on a different level.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know what a D minor over D major makes me feel like, but it's not good.
It's like the stress of the life.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh, I gotta show you this next example.
It's like
Let me, it's on the same page, I'll just freeze it on the screen and go further down.
Up with that anxiety that you did or something. Like if you call it over there.
yeah, it's a way of like making me feel.
Okay, here's a little passage or progression of composition that the author, I would assume the author put together. And it consists completely of polychords or bichords. You see the analysis symbols up above the staff? Like for instance, the very first chord is an A major triad over an A flat major triad. They're sounding at the same time. And I play this sometimes in my office, not because I want to go crazy or anything, but because, sometimes I need to revisit this stuff before we teach. And, it just, because the spacing is kind of far apart, it's not intolerable to me. Isn't that weird?
It was also weird until you hit the B minor over G, and that was kind of crazy.
Yeah,
That
and you know
sounded cool.
why? Because B minor and G major share a lot of the same tones. But A major and A flat major, they don't share a lot of stuff. And whereas you say there's probably maybe there's no time, maybe there isn't. But I can say because it starts on A and A flat and ends on A and A flat, I think those two pitches are kind of prominent and more important perhaps a little bit. And you see those chords show up in the middle somewhere too.
Yeah, I was gonna say like if you played like a one chord and then like a six chord in the same key, I'm sure it sounded a lot nicer.
It's just kind of, they're again experimenting, different universe, trying to combine different sounds, come up with different structures. Okay, I probably better move on to polychords. We could spend the whole class period on them. Got to talk about some other kinds of structures too. There is something in 20th century music, not only called a bichord, but something called bitonality. Guess what this means? Two different keys sounding at the same time. Okay, so here's this is talking about chord. two chords at the same time. But we can talk about bitonality, two keys sounding at the same time, or you can even use the term bimodality. Two different modes being used or sounding at the same time. And this example here, 2618, is a good example of it. This is actually from a composition by a composer named Bartók. He was a Hungarian 20th century, I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was a Hungarian composer. When two or more key centers are heard at the same time, that's talking about bitonality. I guess theoretically you could have 3 tonal centers and 4 tones sounding at the same time, but we don't see a lot of that because the ear is just already having a hard enough time. But another, I guess I should say that a generic term for these would be polytonality, more than one key at the same time. So talking about multiple chords at the same time, here we're talking about multiple keys or notes sounding at the same time. Just to get you a little used to the terminology there. And if I take my trusty book to the piano, you want to guess what this sounds like? Well, let's look at the key signatures first of all. There's no no flats or sharps in the right hand. There's E major key signature, 4 sharps, whatever in the left hand. Yeah, try not to imagine the big fat fluffy cat just traipsing across it. It's like trying to say, don't think of a pink elephant, right? Because then that's an easy to put it.
This is it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do my best here. Not going to be pretty. Lovely, right?
I feel like
What
it
was that?
would,
Yeah, it wasn't that bad, I guess.
It was better than I
I feel like it would sound better if the key signatures were closer together.
Yeah.
Kind of like playing like Happy Birthday in C in the left hand and then in D in the right
Oh,
hand
okay.
or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly Bartók why he decided to choose these 2 different tonal areas. But that's what he did in this particular passage. Okay, so that's a little bit about bitonality. The next batch of chords is really interesting too. You know how ever since you started theory here, and all throughout the tonal era for over 2 centuries, almost 3 centuries, we've been dealing with spelling chords that are stacked in intervals of thirds. We call them tertian harmonies. Well, in the 20th century, composers started constructing chords out of intervals other than thirds. Now, so for instance, composers started building chords. They said, well, what happens? I mean, what would it sound like? Why can't we build a chord out of stacked fourths? And by the way, they only used, thankfully, they didn't use augmented or diminished fourths. They only used perfect fourths. They at least restricted themselves to that. So for instance, D, a fourth above that is G, a fourth above G is C, and a fourth above C is F. There's a chord. And chords that are built out of stacked perfect fourths are called quartal harmonies. Quartal, quart, meaning 4, obviously. And the analysis symbol that I'd like you to use for quartal harmonies when you find them is going to be this symbol, Q4. The book tells you to analyze it just as Q, but it's not specific enough because we're going to find chords that are stacked in fifths, and those are called quintal harmonies. Q4 for quartal harmony. So let's see what that sounds like. I've heard that before. Is that Star Trek? I don't even know. It's something like that. The boldly go to where his romance is gone before. Yeah, not Star Wars. This is Star Trek. Okay, let me give you another example. How about this one? Okay, now you might look at this structure and say, well, I don't know, it looks like it's built by mostly stacked force, but then there's this third up here. What on earth, what incarnation is this? And the answer is, even if the notes of a chord are not all stacked in perfect fourths, but the majority of the notes are stacked in perfect fourths, it still can be called a quartal chord, or a Q4, if all of its notes could be rearranged in stacked perfect fourths. Because there's no inversions or anything. You see, if I took this F sharp and I dropped it 2 octaves, I can't think about how I would move to this. Do you see how if I brought this down and took it off of there, it would be a quartal chord exactly? Because F sharp to B is a fourth, and B to E is a fourth, and so on and so forth. So if most of the notes are stacked as perfect fourths, not all of them are, but if you rearrange the notes, and you could get them all to be stacked as perfect fourths, then you can safely call the chord a quartal chord as well. Okay? And that's, I think, as far as I want to go with quartal chords. Yeah.
Okay, this might be a question for later, but like when they do that and change, how can you tell the difference between those and like the 13 chord and like the 11 chord?
Yeah, you can, like, the way you tell the difference between this and like a 13th chord is, again, primarily the intervals used here are going to be fourths rather than in the extended tertiary chords. Primarily intervals are going to be thirds. No matter how you rearrange these notes, you can't really get them to be stacked, I guess, in thirds, even with, some of the chord tones omitted. Yeah, it gets kind of tricky, but just with a little bit of experience, a little practice, and certainly a little bit of context, you'll be able to make a wise, an educated analysis of these chords rather than just guessing. Yeah. Yep. Okay, let's go to quintal chords. Those are chords built out of stacked perfect fifths. They sound just a little different. Or for instance, C up to G, up to D, up to A. That is a quintal chord, and its analysis symbol is Q5. So let's see, this is what that one sounds like. I think that's all I really want to say about quintal chords. And keeping an eye on the time, I've got about 5 more minutes. Let's talk about another class of chords. Composers actually built chords by stacking seconds. Yeah, cool, right? Okay, a chord that's built out of stacked seconds is called a secundal chord. And its analysis symbol is just capital S. Okay, no Roman numerals for these. A secundal chord is a chord built out of seconds. There's an example. You might say, well, I don't know, Dr. Hawkinson, look, there's an interval that's not a second in there. For instance, from C up to A, that's not a second. But again, can the notes be rearranged into stacked seconds? Yes, because if I drop it's an octave, it's A, B, C. It can be constructed and rearranged into stacked seconds. Okay. Let's see here. I want to say this. Here's another example of a secundal chord. those could be arranged in seconds, A sharp, B, and C.
And it doesn't matter if it's a minor or a major second?
Nope, it doesn't matter. The last one I wanted to show you is, well, I don't want to double Y, because it's still a sequential chord. These are all sequential chords. The last one I want to show you is, if you have a sequential chord where its pitches are in the closest possible position, that is, if all the pitches are adjacent to each other in second intervals. Like for instance, if I rearrange this, well, let me just do one like this. That's a sequential chord. But do you see how its notes are not spread around or anything? It's in its closest, tightest possible position. When a sequential chord is in its closest possible position and adjacent pitches are in second intervals, the chord is called a tone cluster. A tone cluster. We go over here and put up another tone cluster. Here's a good one. It's a sequential chord where all the notes are in their closest possible position. They're all in seconds, not inversions of seconds or anything like that. So a sequential chord where all the pitches are adjacent, crammed in their closest possible position is called a tone cluster. And the term tone cluster was actually coined by an American composer named Henry Cowell. And Henry Cowell, he had early musical experiments that called for pianists to play certain passages of music with their fists, with their palms, and even with their entire forearms. Because you get tone clusters that way. That's a good way to play it. And I'm not making this, I don't know how many years ago, maybe you guys weren't here, but Dr. Miller Niles actually did a piano concert once, and she did some Cowell pieces, and some of it is actually where you actually go inside the piano and play some of the strings. But other Cowell pieces, and I don't have time to show you, I have a YouTube clip I'll have to show you next week, but it shows the pianist, actually playing with fists and palms and even their shoulder. They go down it, I'm not kidding.
So you must like when you have to clean the piano.
So here's the sequential chords that I have on the board. The first one is, the next one I have is this. And then here's a tone cluster. And then here's another tone cluster. And the only chord I didn't get to was whole tone chords. Whole tone chords are chords that are not like any of these. They're just chords that can be built by using the notes of the whole tone scale. That's the definition of one. So if you find a chord in your homework that's not any of these, but you can find that all the pitches of that chord could be part of a whole tone scale, you have what's called a whole tone chord. And I'm just going to have to end right there with that.
What's the analysis for the whole?
Oh yeah, whole tone chord. I think the book will tell you. To just put like WT for whole tone. It's got like some strange abbreviation. But your assignment for Monday, I know it's kind of quick, but your assignment is just page 281. If you look in your workbook to page, I think it's 281. Yeah, you're doing the whole page. It's just labeling the types of chords based on what we've learned. And follow the directions specifically because in section A, you only get to choose from a certain number of chords. Like, it'll only say polychords and 13, something like that. But then in the next section, you get to choose from other ones like sequential and whole tone and things like that. So just make sure you follow the instructions, and I think you'll be okay. But it shouldn't take long. It's just a little bit of personal. Okay, that's all the time I have. We'll have to stop here. Remind me on Monday, if I can, I want to show you that YouTube video of the lady playing with her phone. Okay, but we got to stop there. So have a good weekend.
Anyway, 13.
This is just your control.
That would be this
Lower, click through it,
So you guys are
Oh, yeah,
So we have a deal with it. Okay, so maybe you have something like that.
I also, but I
Well, because it's a space But if you did it like this, let's see
It's not
this week we're doing extended play, we really have like a sound that basis. But they're kind of also whereas polychords, they have to be distinct enough, but we never.
Well, I would say
That's bull. Why do you do that?
Because I have to work. It's okay, I took my percent and I waited all of them but like 2 moves.
yeah.
Just because like when it comes to those
It's, I don't see it all that. Yeah, I mean, whatever theoretically possible.
I can't. Like, why did I reason dirt? My apologies.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Yeah, I wanted to make it, I figured it's very.
Yeah.
Yes, can you like print it out,
What? You should
the
treat
correct version?
You really should. I will,
Get that
because
to you.
I can think I'm gonna get it after.
I realized when I was showing them my roommates and explaining.
Well, I don't have a course, I
Um,
have a piano.
I was trying to explain the music things to her because she's not a music person.
Yep.
I looked at her and I'm like,
Literally, I
this
didn't
is,
use the teacher.
oh, this is in concert pitch.
Yeah.
And I looked at when I turned it off, I'm like, that's in concert.
Yeah, you need to have the transpose.
Yeah, I almost cried. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay.
I'll get that printed off and see.
It was a lot of things, and I could not think about how to push it past it. There's not a list, so I just started working on it.
Yes, what, I have to get out of here because I know Dr. Darrell Harrell has a class coming in. But if I go now,
That's the one I got wrong. I'm almost positive.
okay, I can be there in a few minutes.
Yeah, I just have two questions.
I'm not sure. Actually, she might not, because I was given the option to take the test at 10, but I told her I had a piano lesson, so I think she's free right now.
Oh, okay. I might ask her, because I bet it's the one I got wrong.
Why is this tracking this?
I just want to know the problem.
Okay.
Yeah, 'cause I don't know, like now, like I've already fallen into a rut with it, just because it's so easy to make it sound like copy.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I can understand that, I guess.
But yeah, there's one thing that I did make that doesn't sound copy, that sounds really good, although it does stray out of Lydian for a little bit, but.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be there in just a few minutes.
All right, sounds good.
Hi, Crazy Fridays. I left the TVs on, is that okay?
Yep. I'll need it, thank
Perfect.
you.
Yep, all right. Oh, I didn't take my card out of the camera.
Oh.
I better do that.